Hey, and welcome to episode 11 of Think Like a Hacker. Just as a reminder, we've changed the format of the podcast. So this week we've got 2 episodes, and we'll be doing this going forward. The first episode is the news with Kathy and myself early in the week, and then later on in the week we'll air an interview. And this episode is an interview. And so this episode we're chatting with Dave Ryan. I had a wonderful chat with Dave at WordCamp Orange County. Dave is a prolific contributor to WordPress in so many ways. He is a meetup organizer, he helps organize WordCamps, and perhaps most importantly, he's a contributor to WordPress core. He's a developer, and he's paid by Bluehost to be a full-time contributor to the WordPress core code. Dave works with a team at Bluehost, and we had an incredible conversation. We chatted about so many different things: how to become a core contributor, the future of WordPress, some of the challenges that it's facing. We chatted about security, of course, and many other things, and I think you'll really enjoy the conversation. Here's Dave Ryan at WordCamp Orange County.
I am Dave Ryan, and I am a WordPress developer, among other things.
How long have you been a WordPress developer?
Professionally now for just about 4 or 5 years, but I've been tinkering with WordPress since I was in middle school. So.
Okay. What attracted you to WordPress?
I think I sort of fell into it sideways through a bunch of different things I was doing. I was really into podcasts and video editing and media, and I needed a place to publish that content.
Okay.
And so I had WordPress sites for that, but I was also on a track for a little while going towards journalism and being a reporter, so I was using WordPress all the time for work, and I was also building sites for projects, and so I eventually just got to the point where I felt like I wanted to be a reporter initially because I thought it was a really great way to help people. But I think that being a developer and working on WordPress is also a really great way to help people and help people sort of realize their dreams and build something really cool.
So you started off creating media, and you realized that WordPress can help you do that, and then you started kind of customizing things and got more involved, and then it evolved into that being what you do.
Yeah, it was really just, it was like a microphone for a musician, or just, it was one of my tools for multiple things I was interested in, and as I learned more of it, it just became more of a passion, and I eventually met the WordPress community, and I started going to meetups, and then I ended up actually organizing a WordCamp before I ever went to a WordCamp. So it's been a kind of wild ride the past few years, but it's been a lot of fun.
Wow. How did you get roped into organizing a WordCamp before you'd even been to one?
So WordCamp Phoenix didn't happen in 2015. So I was working with a bunch of folks who were trying to do the 2016 reboot. And the lead organizer was like getting married and like had all this stuff on his plate. So I was like, I can help you like make a website for this thing. And then it just sort of grew from there. So I work for Endurance International Group. And I work primarily with Bluehost. But about 80% of my time, my boss gives back to the WordPress project and community. So everything from working on WordPress.org sites and WordCamp.org to contributing back to the project with code to coming to WordCamps like WordCamp Orange County.
And you work with a team that also contributes their time to WordPress?
Last May, Bluehost hired 5 of us. So most of my team is based on the East Coast. I'm out in Tempe, Arizona, where we also have our support office.
And what does the team do?
It's really kind of mixed, and it's really kind of cool. Bluehost, to their credit, brought in a very sort of interdisciplinary team coming from a lot of different backgrounds. A few of my teammates were in higher education, and we're working with WordPress at universities. Some of my teammates were working on WordPress themes, and so they're sort of in the theme space a little more. I came from a background in enterprise publishing, so yeah, we're sort of all over the sort of experience board, but day to day, some of us are working on themes. One of my teammates is working on triaging all of the tickets on the WordPress core track. Another one of my teammates is working on the REST endpoints that are needed for the new menu system in the next phase of Gutenberg. So a little bit of everything.
Wow. So, and this is mainly for our listeners and our viewers who don't understand this aspect of the ecosystem, but you work for Endurance, and Endurance is a company that owns a range of hosting companies, and Bluehost is one of those companies.
Correct.
Okay, and they also own HostGator?
HostGator, iPage, Fat Cow. You can also get WordPress hosting through domain.com, which is another property we own. One of the perhaps better known brands would be Constant Contact.
Right. I actually didn't realize that Endurance owned them. So
I think as of 2016. So.
Okay, cool. Is there a lot of crossover between the different hosts? Do you guys talk to each other because your parent is the same?
Yes and no. So Endurance for a little while was sort of in an acquisition mode where they were buying up a lot of different hosts. Bluehost started as an independent company. HostGator started as an independent company. And Endurance came in and purchased a bunch of these different hosts. And some of them got rolled a little bit tighter together. When they acquired Bluehost, they realized that Bluehost was doing a lot of sort of interesting things. So Bluehost sort of stayed a little bit more separate than some of the other brands. But we do occasionally interact with people elsewhere in the company. I sit with a bunch of the developers at domain.com in our Tempe office. So.
Okay, yeah. Because I guess over time, what business people would call economies of scale would begin to kick in, where you guys are all doing the same thing. There's duplication between the companies, and so Endurance would say, well, hey, why don't we just get one team to do that thing and for everyone, right?
Yeah, and I think that there's different hosts for different needs within the company, and some of them are more in an activated mode, like Bluehost, and then there's some that are a little bit more in maintenance mode, I'd say. So.
Okay, activated mode meaning the company's going for growth, or?
Well, the company's focused on the brand. So Endurance is definitely focused on Bluehost right now. It's a place where we're hoping to grow. It's where a bunch of resources and focus is for most of the company's WordPress efforts. So,
cool. I'm actually a fan of Bluehost. With Kerry and I, before we got into the WordPress space, we ran something called Feedit, which was a real-time little widget you could put on your site and see the most recent visitors.
Okay.
And it would just show like a country flag, the city name, and I think the referring sites as well. And then it started off just as a static thing, and then it became real-time. And we grew from 0, it went viral, to over 1 million websites using that.
Oh, wow.
And we started it in about 06, 07, and then it went viral, and we actually ended up raising some angel money because of that from someone who's still a very good friend, Naval Ravikant, who's kind of famous now. But and so we burned through we raised 450K, we burnt through it, kept going, and then we needed to pay the bills, and we were just trying all kinds of revenue models. And one of the things we tried that was one of the perhaps the most successful thing we ever did with Feedit was putting a Bluehost affiliate link in the footer, because the most popular platform using us was Blogspot.
Okay.
And so they were all busy migrating over to WordPress. And so that affiliate link, Bluehost paid us, I think, double what they would normally pay an affiliate for doing that. Alfred Najem was the guy that I worked with. He was like our account manager, and we made, at our peak, we made about $20,000 per month.
Oh, wow.
And then it tailed off pretty quickly as we kind of burned through the population of folks that were planning on migrating to much less than that. And we had to sort of move on to something else. And then eventually, I got onto creating Wordfence, but Bluehost paid our bills for a while. Remember that?
Big time.
So
that's really funny. So Endurance actually sponsored a nonprofit called Donors Choose. And when I was in high school, I used Donors Choose to fund some resources for our online news website. So I actually sort of came full circle when I started at Bluehost, because they were the ones who kind of got me started working in WordPress and paying for my hosting and all of that. So.
Yeah, so I have good feelings about Bluehost, that's for sure. And I know some people that work for you, Mike Hansen as well.
Mike's my boss,
cool
he's a
dude.
great guy.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to try to interview him while I'm here.
Sure, yeah.
I think he's here, isn't he?
Yeah, he's here.
Yeah, so I thought I'd maybe have a chat with him. But yeah, he's a cool dude, and there's a bunch of other people that I've met, and it just seems like a really great team. So yeah. So what are some of the more innovative things you guys are doing right now?
I think it's a really exciting time in the WordPress space because there's so much change happening with themes, with the new block editor. So one of the things I'm working on right now that I'm really excited about is an overhaul of our plugin interface in the admin and really sort of taking a focus on making that accessible and also really just useful for everyone. What else? Is this specifically about Bluehost or about WordPress or?
Oh, either.
Either.
Yeah. And what I'm really interested in is what you're passionate about right now.
I think right now we're at this like golden age of version 1 of a product. When the first iPhone came out, everyone knew it was going to be cool. Everyone knew it was going to change the world, but they didn't know how. And I think we're really sort of at that point right now with the Gutenberg editor, where I think most people have really come around to, wow, this is actually really cool. This is really powerful. And we're just starting to see some things come out with it, but I don't think we've really seen yet how Gutenberg is going to shape WordPress and shape publishing online. And I think that there's a number of exciting signs that it's sort of bigger than itself. Drupal has looked at adopting it. I saw that Laravel this past week or two released an add-on that lets them deploy the editor. So I think if something is starting to grow outside of the WordPress ecosystem that was built in the WordPress ecosystem that quickly, that's probably a pretty good sign. The question is now, okay, we have this thing that is really cool that everyone loves. How do we take this legacy project of 15 years and really start to bake it in? So I think that starts to happen somewhat in phase 2 with menus and widgets and some of these things we really see as really classic pieces of WordPress. But I think that sort of phase 3 or 4 of workflows and seeing how it handles translation, some of these other really complex tasks that we just haven't figured out yet, I'm really excited about some of that period in that workflows phase when we really start to see how do we work collaboratively, how do we just sort of shift that focus from this is a box where I enter stuff into to this is a software application that I can use to do anything. So
it's cool to hear someone that optimistic about WordPress because WordPress is 33-ish% of the top sites on the web. I mean, that's a lot of growth and that's a lot of market share. And you're sounding like, well, that's just the beginning.
I think it is just the beginning, but I do think we also are coming up on some really hard choices. Because everyone really loves Gutenberg, we're now faced with this question of, okay, well, how do we share blocks in between each other? So there's a proposal for a block directory. And the proposal for the block directory was a little bit controversial because it started to cleave PHP or server-side code from running in a block that would be distributed in this directory. Partially, probably because that would make it easier to adopt in a Drupal instance or in another place and make these blocks really work anywhere the editor works. But there are certain things at the end of the day, most people are going to want a server to run. One of them maybe being a contact form. At the end of the day, you're always going to have to send data somewhere with a site. So I'm really sort of curious to see how that directory pans out and whether there's a decision made that we really need to build this for everyone because it will take a lot longer, or if we decide there are some things that we can sort of let everyone have, but that we really need to focus on making great for WordPress. Because at some point, to be able to grow, there are some things I think we're going to have to leave behind. So,
Dave, I want to unpack that a little bit. So Gutenberg is a block-based editor, and there are certain capabilities that you can add to Gutenberg with WordPress plugins, and those create new block types. Is that correct?
Sure. Yep.
Okay. And those block types provide you with certain capabilities, right? And you're saying that for certain capabilities, you need PHP code to enable that.
You don't necessarily...
Am I understanding you correctly?
Sure. I guess not necessarily always PHP code. You could have, say, a Lambda service spun up, but that's getting, again, into a realm that's outside of really WordPress's core mission of publishing for everyone.
Yeah. So when you were talking about making a hard decision, you were saying that the block directory could just have blocks that can be used by WordPress and other platforms, and would that remove any back-end functionality from those blocks? Is that right?
It wouldn't completely restrict back-end functionality, but it would restrict it to basically what's available in the editor. So I'm trying to think how to put...
And is it because that code is client-side code, basically?
Well, it's mostly client-side code, but the question is, if I say at a contact form, at some point at the end of the day, that data has to make it back over the wire into my WordPress database. So to do that, it has to be able to hit some kind of API endpoint of some kind. But to register an API endpoint in WordPress, you have to do that on the server side. And there's a number of other sort of pretty big logistical challenges with having the blocks registered on the client side as opposed to being registered on the server side. There's a number of advantages to the server being aware of some of the block attributes. So that presents some challenges to the REST API endpoints. And
the choice that you were saying that we have to make is that the one choice, option A, is that the blocks are, you use the term registered on the client side.
Yes.
And so is that client-side code? Is that JavaScript? Or?
Yeah, so it's JavaScript code.
All right, and that would be pure JavaScript code running on the client side, and it's portable between WordPress and other user platforms that are using Gutenberg.
Right.
And then option B is that we also have code that's, to use your term again, registered on the server side, and that provides an API endpoint with the ability to store things in the database and that kind of thing. And so it provides a much richer capability for those blocks, but it would be less portable. It would be specific to WordPress at that point. And maybe you can port it to other platforms, but it introduces a lot of complexity. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that's definitely it.
Okay.
If it's built with a server-side oriented approach, anything that really currently works in WordPress could be used within the block almost right away. But with the sort of more agnostic approach of trying to make these blocks work well for everyone, which I think is a worthwhile problem, the question is whether it's the problem we really need to be solving. When you build something for everyone, you solve a lot more problems than if you build it just for yourself. So I'm sure that there'd be some really cool benefits that we would get if we went down that road of, let's make this work for Drupal, let's make this work for everyone. I guess the question is, if we're to retain that market share, if we're to, grow this community, does that sort of bite off a problem that's too large? I think it's probably a fair statement that we're having a little bit of trouble organizing WordPress as it is today, and that we're sort of rethinking that what got WordPress to where it is today isn't going to keep sustaining it, and that there is some sort of shift in how teams are structured and how deployments are structured. I think we are sort of at this decision point. WordPress is open regardless, but should the focus be, do we build this really great tool for WordPress users in the WordPress community, or do we build this much larger tool for the web community? I'm not sure if I have the right answer to that, and I think that there's pros and cons to both. But I do think it's a decision that we're sort of starting to enter. So,
you mentioned that what has worked in the past might not work in the future, and that there's been a shift in the way teams are structured and so on. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, and I don't think that there's anything I know that's secret in that regard. It's just that since the release of WordPress 5, there's been a change in the leadership. Josepha Hayden is now the executive director of the project.
And we did a wonderful interview with
saw
her,
that
which I
wonderful
thoroughly
interview.
enjoyed. I actually would like to chat with her again in the next 6 to 12 months. It was great.
Yeah. But I think that new leadership is coming in and trying to take a look and say, all right, we have this really cool thing. We have these really cool opportunities. How do we make the most of them? How do we keep the things that got us here that are really good, but how do we sort of rethink some of the things that might not work at the scale we're at anymore, or might need to change within the changing web we live in? So I don't know what the answers to those are, but I do think in the next few months we will see some shift in how some of the project is structured.
I chatted with a couple that own a coffee roastery in
Okay.
Idlewild a week or two ago, and it was a great interview. Lots of talk about coffee, but they run a website. It's Black Mountain Coffee, and they use Squarespace. They don't use WordPress. And in chatting with Chris about why he went to Squarespace, he said one of the challenges is that he didn't have budget for a developer, and he also didn't want to deal with that complexity. He just wanted to get up and running as fast as he possibly could, and that's why he went with Squarespace. And in chatting with a friend about WordPress, indications were that he would need a developer to help him customize the site and so on, and it would be a little bit more of a learning curve. Do you think that's an accurate assessment from him? And if so, how do we improve that?
It's hard to say without fully knowing that situation. I think it is completely possible for an average person who has, who uses apps on their phone and, is familiar with an email account to come in and start publishing content and configuring a WordPress site. I don't think it's necessarily without work. I don't think that there is a magic wave your wand, thing that makes a website appear, because even with Squarespace, you're going to invest some time figuring out that interface and figuring out how to configure it and change it and store your logo. So, but I do think that there is some merit to that idea of, has WordPress become too hard? Are there easier things on the market? Are winds shifting? I guess I like to think of it like housing, or this is something I think about a lot in hosting, that a lot of people have a lot of allegiance to a company, like to a hosting company, which is great, or they have a lot of animosity with a hosting company. And not everyone needs the same size house. A single person doesn't need a 5-bedroom house in the suburbs, and a family of 5 shouldn't try to cram into a studio apartment. So there's the right size product for a lot of different needs. And I think that there are all kinds of WordPress themes. There are WordPress themes that power really simple sites for the coffee shop on Main Street. And there are WordPress sites that power some of the largest publications on the planet. So, I think that there's sort of degrees of complexity there. And without knowing, what features were missing from WordPress for him, was it, an easy way to order from your phone and then show up? It'd be hard to say.
Sure. Do you think that WordPress is competing with the likes of Squarespace and other platforms like that?
I think, sure, to a degree. I think that all things that build a website are competing against each other. But I think that there's also space for everyone. I think, I can't remember the number or the metric, but one of the things we look at as a web host that works with a lot of small business is how many people in this space don't have a website. And it's the majority. It's 60 or 70% of small businesses don't have a website. That's huge space for growth.
Agreed.
So until we're having trouble acquiring customers, and different hosts are having trouble acquiring customers, I'm not sure if we're really competitors. I think that we're all trying to grow this space and this idea of, how do we help people, leverage technology to make their world better and make their world different and shape it in their image and share their art and all those exciting things. So at some level, yes, is WordPress competing with some of those other platforms, and are WordPress hosts competing with each other? A little bit, but everyone has sort of started to find different niches that they serve really well. And companies are going to be innovating in the WordPress space in very different ways. We're looking for innovations for small businesses and sort of lower usage customers, but at a scale of millions. Whereas some of the top hosts in the space, they're looking to solve problems for 1,000 really large customers. So I think that at the end of the day, we're both going to figure some things out, and it's going to help each other. So.
Cool. So I want to get back to the fact that Bluehost have a team of, you said about 5 people that are contributing to core. Mm-hmm. Why do you think Bluehost funds that?
Why do I think I have a job?
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's multi-pronged. At the end of the day, Bluehost doesn't exist without WordPress, and so they're not necessarily getting a say even in what I'm doing all the time. Sometimes I'm working on something that really doesn't have a lot of benefit to most of our customers, but by growing WordPress, by keeping it strong, it's keeping the Bluehost business strong. I think there also is some benefit to them in visibility, that people who are working on this are coming out to these events. They're seen as a good community citizen from that. But I wasn't looking for a job at a web host when I took this job. In fact, I never really thought I would be working at a tech company. I always thought I would be working in media and publishing. So part of the reason I took this job is that I feel like by working on WordPress full time, I get to help every publisher that uses WordPress, not just the company that I'm working at. And I think that's really cool. So
I think it's really cool too. Yeah. My views have shifted on it as well. I guess at one point we couldn't really pay the bills, and then at some point our business grew big enough so that we could pay the bills, and then we were able to hire, and then we became a larger organization, and we got to take a deep breath and kind of look around it and see, realize that the WordPress community is amazing, and we've made so many friends in the community.
Yeah.
And it's, as we've kind of gotten the space to breathe, we've had that realization that helping WordPress helps us. We're now I think the most popular security plugin for WordPress by a decent margin, and if WordPress succeeds, so do we.
Right.
So we're beginning to, over the last 2 years, in a fairly significant way, we've started doing things that help the community. Sponsoring WordCamps. We're funding a documentary about the open source community that powers WordPress. That kind of thing. Also sponsoring meetups and so on. At this point, we don't have any folks that are full-time dedicated to contributing to core, but it's certainly something that we're beginning to look at. So
it's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm all for more companies contributing to the space. I think from the outside, it can be very easy to think, oh, those two companies, they're competitors. When, companies help each other out all the time. In Phoenix, we have GoDaddy, Bluehost, SiteLock, Pagely. Oh gosh, I hope I don't forget someone. There's a bunch of WordPress companies in the space. And so we're all friends. We all see each other at meetups. I speak at the GoDaddy meetup. They speak at our meetup. If my stand is broken at an event, the GoDaddy guys know me. They're helping me out. I'm helping, like one of their customers at an event when they show up. It's not about, how can we compete? It's how do we grow this for everyone? We have this really cool opportunity that, we're working on software that powers a third of the internet. How do we take that power and give it back to people and share it? So, hopefully we can try to be an example of what we want to see with some international collaboration and some other spaces in the world. So.
Are you going to WordCamp Europe?
I'm not going to WordCamp Europe this year, I don't think.
Oh, darn.
One of my teammates will be there, Michael Wood, he's speaking. So.
Okay, cool. Kerry and I are heading over there. We somewhat last minute, probably 3 months ahead of time, but we're going to go over there and meet with some folks, and I think do a few interviews. And
Nice.
It'll be our first visit to WordCamp Europe. So we're going with is it 5 of us going total, Kerry? I think it's about 6. It was going to be just a small, 2 people going to kind of recon things and figure out logistics for sponsoring next year, possibly. But it expanded. So now there's 6 of us, and Kathy's going, and her son Max, and,
oh, great.
and so on. So yeah, we're pretty excited. Anything else that you want to chat about?
I think it's a really exciting time in the space. Like I said, I think there's a lot, we're sort of in this, we know there's a lot of change right now, but we don't know what it is. And so I think it's just, again, about asking some of these big questions about who we are. Are we the web platform for everyone? Are we the web platform for bloggers? We just sort of made that verbal shift. But for example, actually something that I think I pinged you about recently was I'm working on some headless WordPress stuff just on my personal site. And it's really sort of opening my eyes to some of the ways that WordPress really doesn't work great as a headless CMS. WordPress really expects to be the sort of source of truth and the center of everything. It expects to be your sort of main thing. And I think what's going to be really interesting sort of going forward, and almost back to that question, is WordPress every inch of your website? Or is WordPress a stage of your website? Is WordPress your content dam? Is it where you go to create and edit, but then something else handles publishing? So, as we start to figure out, what can we take with us from WordPress, and what do we have to maybe leave behind if we're going to sort of go into uncharted territories and try new things? I think that's sort of going to be a big question is, do we want WordPress to be a first-rate headless CMS that works decoupled from a WordPress theme? Or
describe to me what a headless CMS actually is.
Sure. So the idea of a headless or decoupled CMS is that you're separating all your content and creation tools from your site itself, and that WordPress really becomes a data source and not the application that gets loaded when someone visits your site. Something else entirely handles your site. But WordPress is still where you maybe go to publish and create all the content that ends up there.
Why would you do that? What are the benefits?
So there's some speed advantages, depending on how you do it. One way that's been very common for a long time is static sites. A static website where you just take the site and flatten it into HTML and CSS and JavaScript and put it on a server. Sort of an exciting new space with Jamstack sites like Gatsby and Gridsome. And they essentially still generate a static site, but once you load up one of the pages that's static, it turns itself dynamically into a single page application, like a very powerful JavaScript single page application.
And that's running in the browser?
It's running in the browser.
Okay.
That is Ajaxing in data you might need for another page transition, that just works differently than static sites have before. You sort of have your flat files and you have data files, so that it can sort of...
So you're loading up a static content, it's executing JavaScript in the browser.
Mm-hmm.
That JavaScript is making API calls via Ajax to API endpoints that give it data that can then be processed in the client side and rendered and displayed, and you can do things with that.
Very close, but I guess the key distinction here is that there is a generation process, very similar to static sites of the past. But in addition to generating those flat HTML files where shall we say, the text of the page is burned in to the template, it also puts out a template file and a data file.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Alrighty, let me get that. Okay.
So where were we?
Well, we were chatting about static sites.
Okay, so
and yeah.
So Traditionally, with a single page application, you do need to hit an API endpoint, go and request some data and get it back. But you're still going to have some time for that turnaround. It's still probably faster than running a PHP application, but it's still going to be a turnaround to get that API response. So a Jamstack site's really cool because you can request data from WordPress, which is what I do with my site, and then it pulls all that data down from the API, and then it generates that data into a data file, as well as the flat HTML file, so that when the application loads and my site loads, on that first page, you're getting an HTML file. But if you click on any other link within the site, it's actually going out and grabbing that data file that's flat and grabbing a JavaScript file and using that to generate the content. So the result is that it's just this very instantaneous, very fast, very efficient and predictable click. Whereas if you click on something that has to access something server side, it's always gonna be, well, am I gonna get something cached? Am I gonna get a quick response? Is it gonna take a while? So having a predictable click and the predictable amount of load time in a site can really help traffic.
So you're saying that WordPress is being used as a backend for that? Right.
So that would be what headless and decoupled CMS is separating the front end system from the system that you create and edit and store content in, such that CMS is really just a layer, like a data layer in your application, as opposed to your entire application.
But it sounds so different to the way WordPress has worked for so many years. Why even use WordPress on the back end? What's the benefit? Is it because you get all the tools to generate the content, or?
I think some of it really are the content generation tools. As easy as it is to say, oh, like I could duplicate the design of the WordPress admin. There's visual design, but there's also interaction design that goes into the WordPress admin. And people from all over the world for close to 15 years, well, over 15 years now, have poured their time and energy into making this one particular interface work really well. It's also something that some people have 10 or 15 years of experience using. So it's really hard to sort of beat that snowball of, I know how to use this thing, and I know how to make it work.
And I have a community that knows how to use the thing and to help me if I need that.
As soon as I need something else, I just go and click a button and it's there. I need a contact form, done. My site got hacked, let me install Wordfence, right? So it's all, so anything is possible, right? There's no limits at the end of the day to what we can do technically. The main limit is time. And so if we can make it really easy to build a site, which is what WordPress has done, then we need to keep it easy, and we need to keep it that sort of one-click experience of, I know it just works, and I know if I need something else to just work, it will too.
So Dave, you're a core contributor, is that right?
I guess that's yeah, you could put it that way, yes.
Okay. If someone wanted to become a core contributor in WordPress,
yes,
how do they do that?
It's surprisingly simple. You just go to make.wordpress.org, and there's a whole handbook that says, here's how you download a development copy of WordPress. It is probably easier if you're a developer and you have some technical know-how, but there's all kinds of ways to contribute to WordPress. I just ran a contributor day actually at WordCamp Phoenix, and we had people who helped us translate WordPress into a few different dialects of Spanish. We had some designers who were interested in contributing back to the design aspect of the project. We had some communications people who were looking into the marketing team and some of the exciting work that's going to be happening there to sort of reshape the messaging in the project. So there's all different ways to give back to a project this large. If you go to that make.wordpress.org site, there's all sorts of little tiles. They say core and design and WordPress TV. There's a whole system of people who work together to upload videos from these events and put them online so that people anywhere can get to them and learn things without having to travel. There's all kinds of ways to give back, and if you're not sure, then go to your local meetup, go to a WordCamp, ask them if they need help, volunteer for a WordCamp. There's all kinds of ways to start diving in, and once you start like meeting people, and ask them what they do, ask them how you can get involved, ask them if they need help. There's a lot to do, so don't assume that someone's doing it. If you're interested in doing something, you should just ask someone. So,
if I'm a PHP developer, we'll pretend for a moment I'm a PHP developer, and I want to contribute a patch or some element to core. What's the process to try to get my code included in WordPress core so that everyone in the world ends up using it?
So whenever I find a bug, the first thing I do before I try to write a patch is I go to track, track.core.wordpress.org, and just search for a ticket. And because it's probably a decent chance someone else has had that issue too. And there are some issues that haven't been resolved in 6 years, 8 years. Now, there is a lot of work being done right now to close down some of the open ticket number and resolve some of these things or re-highlight them as an issue. There's a whole triage team that is slowly and dutifully going through and just trying to, get us to a state where we have a clean desk to work with. But go there. If you don't see a ticket, then start one. And if you want to make a patch, you can create a patch there. You can just create it in Git or SVN, upload your patch file, and someone will review it and decide whether or not that's something that belongs in core. Or we don't take refactor PRs, for example, in core. But that's the basic process.
And so you're saying create a ticket in track first before you start writing code, because that way you can see if something already exists, if some work's been done on it already, start a conversation around it and that kind of thing before you start work. Is that?
I find that most things are more complicated than we think, and particularly because this is something we all use and we all use it in a different way. It's really important that before we just go and say, I'm going to fix this, that we ask and we make sure, are we fixing this in a way that works for everyone? Are we making the best use of this opportunity to work on this? Yes, it does slow it down a little bit. Wouldn't it be great if this thing that I need is just fixed? But that's part of the reason we have plugins and we have themes and we have other ways of extending and modifying WordPress to get it to sort of our needs. But then there's that sort of collective group discussion of how do we get this to the place that's best for most people and for everyone. So.
Is that discussion usually fairly civil, or do some people get kind of, smacked down, or what is that like?
I think that the nature of text-based communication is messy. I think
if Twitter's anything to go by,
right. I think that there is this, when you sit down and you have a conversation with someone, I think it's easy to pick up on nonverbal cues. It's easy to pick up on tone, and oh man, I think too many people try to be funny, and it really comes off wrong sometimes.
In text?
In text. So, but overall, I think that I think we have this image of, oh gosh, every ticket is this battle, and some of them I do think get a little bit contentious, and people get very passionate about their solution. But at the end of the day, we're all on the same team. We're not fighting each other. We're fighting for the best solution. So as long as you sort of take that mindset and understand that someone might poke a hole in your idea and say, but wait, you're not considering this other thing? So I guess you have to have a thick enough skin that your ideas might change. And that someone might say, oh, that's a great idea, and then run with it and do something with it. And you're like, but you didn't ask me to. If people are just going to take it and run with it, it's this constant game of pass football. And so it's a give and take. So you have to be willing to be wrong. You have to be willing to be right and stick with it, even if someone else says you're wrong. But it's always doing that professionally and politely, and understanding that most people here, even if they are paid to work on it are volunteering for something, or they're working on a Saturday night on something. So it's just coming in with that sort of kind candor of, I think I found a bug, But if you come in and you say, "Oh, this is stupid," or "Oh, why did anyone ever do this?" or so I think coming in with an attitude, not assuming that you know why something is the way it is, because people might agree with you and say it's bad. Or people might agree with you that there's a better solution, or there's something new that we should try here. But I think it comes back to how we treat each other and that attitude of, all right, how can I, spend a few minutes here to make something better for me, but also make it better for everyone who uses this. So.
It's funny because I thought the only risk was that someone's going to make you feel silly for posting an idea, but you're saying there's another risk that it might be a good idea and someone else will just run with it and go ahead and implement it, and you're like, but I wanted to implement that.
Oh yeah, I think that there's definitely some, you're gonna have like the ones that got away, where it's like, you wanted to work on this one thing, but it turns out someone's been working on that for 6 months, or but as long as you're find your little sort of passion areas, I think it is really good to sort of find a focus or two, like learn one thing like really deeply, and learn a few other things with some depth, and then learn everything kind of generally. And then as you see different things, or as the wind changes, or as, oh, we kind of need to pause on this right now because we have to accomplish this other thing, there's sort of that ebb and flow. So some of it's just going with that flow.
Very cool. Do you have any thoughts about WordPress security, how WordPress can be more secure? And don't feel like we need to talk about Wordfence or anything like that. Sure. I mean, just in general terms, how publishers that are using WordPress can secure their data and their sites and that kind of thing, or other aspects of security?
I think sort of in the same way that newspapers went online and gave away everything for free, I think one of the things that sort of people learned is, oh, we actually do have to pay for content. And I think that there's this idea, oh, it's cheap to run an online business. But I think we have to remember that just because you don't have a storefront where you have insurance, where you have, an electric bill and, a plumbing bill, you're still gonna need some bills if you run an online business or you make money somehow through your online presence. So I see security as sort of this essential thing that, no one wants to pay for insurance, but everyone needs insurance. And I think that we need to have that conversation in our community about, no one really would, at the end of the day wants to spend more, but everyone, when they get hacked, wants someone who they can trust to protect them. So, so I think that that's one of the sort of just like, I think we've had a focus in our community recently about, okay, how do we help people upgrade with PHP, which obviously helps with security some, but sort of there's sort of like always, I think, sort of two things happening in WordPress. There's these sort of technical things that need upgrade, and then there's these sort of like community education that needs upgrade. So I'm really excited about the PHP version bumps that are coming this year.
Something that I'm frustrated with.
Okay.
It is, I have friends in InfoSec, right? So like hardcore information security, cybersecurity, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's this, totally different community outside of WordPress where it's DEF CON, Black Hat, RSA, all of the smaller conferences, all of the B-sides, ShmooCon, etc. I was going to say DerbyCon, but that's soon no longer going to exist, sadly. But the folks that go to those conferences and the security professionals that kind of move in those circles work for big companies, AT&T, etc. Big publishers, companies that have a CISO and a security team, security operations team, and a SOC, security operations center, and that kind of thing. And that world has never taken WordPress seriously, and it really irritates me. And I have I've become Twitter friends, and in fact real life friends as well, with a guy who runs a very popular information security podcast, Pat Gray. And whenever I chat to Pat, and I don't know if I'm going to publish this or not, but if I do, hi Pat, I get the sense that that Pat and the other folks in InfoSec are like, oh, it's just WordPress, ha ha ha, it's a security debacle, Anyway, moving on, let's talk about something serious, like, the latest, exploit, or whatever, latest sophisticated exploit by some nation state attacker. And I think what that folks that move in those circles don't realize is that a WordPress site being hacked is actually a data breach. And some WordPress sites, and you know this because you work for a big hosting company and you guys have some big customers, some of those sites have user accounts databases with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands,
right,
millions in some cases. I think we're approaching the millions category in our database. I think I just painted a giant target on us, but I'm sure there's lots of other targets out there as well. But people don't think about a WordPress hack or breach in those terms. And if you look at all the WordPress sites that are out there, and when I say WordPress, I mean WordPress.org, the open source installations of WordPress that are on, some hosting provider. And if you aggregate all the breaches that happen every day in WordPress, that's a significant number of data breaches that are happening globally on a continuous basis.
Yeah.
And what I'm passionate about is trying to mitigate that, to try to reduce the number of breaches and trying to create awareness among users of WordPress without being alarmist.
Yeah.
I spent some time with Matt Mullenweg last year, and when we told him about the documentary we're making, he made some joke like, "Oh, is it about some giant WordPress hack or something like that?" And I think there was this, a few years ago, we were seen as being a little bit alarmist in the community, on our blog and that kind of thing, and we've really tried to tone it down and just present the facts, because as we were saying earlier, if we help WordPress, that helps us, right? So we don't want to kind of drag WordPress through the mud and, point at it and laugh and say, oh, look what a disaster that is. No, it's a great publishing platform, and we've bet our business on that platform. But in a sort of measured, calm way, I'd love to bring more awareness to users of WordPress, how important it is to secure your site and how damaging it can be and how serious it can be if your site's breached. And by serious, in some, depending on what field you're in, there's certain reporting obligations, there may be fines, that kind of thing. And then I'd also love to bring that awareness to the InfoSec community, the hardcore information security folks, so that we can get more of their energy spent on securing WordPress, and not in a alarmist way or a overly dramatic way or a obnoxious way where they're like, oh God, it's so insecure, it's a joke. No, let's calmly and deliberately and pour some of our passion, our InfoSec passion, into WordPress and make it more secure and help make the community more secure and create more of that awareness.
Well, for a few things. One is that I feel your pain, because if I go to a JavaScript meetup or conference and I mention that I'm a WordPress developer, all kinds of people, CEOs of large JavaScript companies and average developers will take digs at WordPress. And it gets frustrating, but it's also, WordPress is not just PHP anymore. It's about 24% JavaScript. So there's a lot of really exciting things that can happen now that React is in WordPress core, that React is running not just on React sites, but on the third of the internet that WordPress lives on. And what does that mean for the JavaScript ecosystem? And so I think that sort of that language shaming and product shaming attitude is really more a sign of an insecurity or a jealousy than really coming from a really strong place. Part of the reason I say that is I have no background in security, but Facebook's security team is one of, bar none, the best in the industry. Feel free to dispute that, but that's sort of been my read. And if they're comfortable running WordPress for their internal systems, and they've done a line audit or some kind of audit on WordPress, in addition to all of the other audits and the work of the WordPress security team, WordPress is a fairly secure platform for the amount of infrastructure it touches. But I agree that we have a pretty significant target, but also just sort of vulnerability in that there are all these small scale data attacks that can happen, and they might happen without someone's knowledge. if I'm Target or I'm one of these other large companies that's had a breach, I have a responsibility at the end of the day that I have to disclose that. That's not to say that all the big companies that need to disclose a breach are, but that, when you're at a scale and you lose, your Experian, you lose how many millions of records on customers, you have to say something. But I think there is a risk that the theft in WordPress sites is more often than not going to be smaller and going to be in the hundreds or thousands, but that could be just as damaging to someone who was targeted in one of those big breaches.
And if you aggregate all of those up,
Right.
if you sum them all up,
Right.
it's the number of WordPress breaches that are happening on a weekly basis. Those are big numbers.
I think that there is a much stronger focus than there ever has been now in this space of user privacy, to the point that, it's happening at the neighborhood bar. People are making that casual joke about, oh, don't post this on Instagram, because they know in the back of their head that someone could see this. And that is, I think, the biggest change. I grew up during this era of, you post everything on social media, and my generation, I don't know if it necessarily burned anyone getting into college, but it was one of those big discussions of like, oh wait, everything we've been posting is now like, fodder for someone to look at, And I think now that there's been some bigger scandals with celebrities' data being leaked, with the Cambridge Analytica scandal, obviously with Facebook, now that it's so prevalent in the news, but I'm not sure if we've translated all of that attention into education. And so I'm not sure how to sort of narrow that gap. But I agree, I think like the PipDig incident, for instance, Mikey's breakdowns on that were great on your blog.
Oh, thanks.
Like, just whenever there's something, I know that I can go to your blog and get a really thorough breakdown. So I think you guys do a great job with that. But I think that was a really great example of, looks can be deceiving. You can have a really pretty website theme that's really insecure. And I'm not sure how we sort of try to raise that awareness with a customer who really the website is just one aspect of their business. If you're a small business owner, running a coffee shop, you're more focused on, your coffee roaster. You're not thinking about website security. But I think it's almost like car maintenance. We've talked about, okay, if I do preventative maintenance on my vehicle, it prevents disasters down the road. That's something that most people know, and most people will go and do an oil change now. And we've gotten to the point where most people know to wear their seatbelts and why. And so hopefully I think we're starting to enter that space of whether it doesn't matter how technical you are, you have some idea that running a plugin or running a theme could potentially pose some kind of threat to you, and to consider the ramifications of just clicking install. We've made that really easy, but I do worry that we maybe have missed some of that education nuance. But I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities to work on that. So
I agree. And I think I'd love to see more people who are passionate and skilled at information security enter the WordPress space. It's kind of weird, but I'm asking for competition.
Right.
No,
but I would love for more web hosting companies to hire WordPress contributers. Not because I'd be competing with them, but because I'd be collaborating with them.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was David Blackman. He did a presentation on co-opetition, about how companies can cooperate instead of compete, and sort of build a space. And I think that's a really cool idea, and particularly in the sort of open source space that we live in. I think it's really cool that I get to work with people at GoDaddy, and I get to sit down and have a chat with someone at a different company, and I think that diversity of thinking and diversity of ideas helps us, particularly in security. So I would love to see companies sponsor someone full time for the security team. Or
I agree
like
with you. I really do think WordPress is a non-zero sum game. I don't know if you're a John Nash fan, but he did a lot of thinking about how entities can work together to for the common good, and how things that were considered a zero-sum game, my gain is your loss and vice versa,
Right.
can actually be shifted to not be a zero-sum game, and companies or countries can work together to make things better overall, and I think WordPress is very much like that. I think I saw it as early on back in 2012, when it was just me and Kerry, and we had a plugin, and we kind of saw it as, well, we weren't part of the community then at all, and we saw it as well, we need to get our plugin out there and compete with other plugins or security vendors and so on, and hopefully get some of the market share that they will then lose to us. And I don't actually think that that's the reality of it. The world that I live in today is so different from that. I'm friends with many people in GoDaddy, SiteLock. I know some of the guys and the founders of Security are, of course, part of GoDaddy. Cloudflare. I mean, we had a major attack, and we needed DDoS mitigation. And so I reached out to the guys on a weekend, the leadership at Cloudflare, and we just collaborated, and we ended up not using their service and doing something else. But it was just so great to, have those folks, be friends with those people, and we've helped them improve their WordPress firewall rules as well. So, yeah. That is really the nature of how we do things these days. In fact, this interview, right? I mean, I'm talking to someone from Bluehost. Right. Back in the old days, I might have thought, well, maybe they've got some security products that we're competing with or whatever. So, but the WordPress community is so integrated now, and there's so many friendships that cross company boundaries. In fact, there are not very few boundaries, and it's really just about improving the platform and helping the user, right?
Again, I think it's that sort of like that gut expectation of there has to be some kind of competition, and that surprise that there isn't.
Yeah.
One of my favorite guys out in Phoenix is Chris Klazowski. He's the CTO over at Sandhills. They do easy digital downloads.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I just interviewed Tyler Lau from.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So Chris is a great guy, and he's always helping people out. He'll spend like 2 or 3 hours just helping someone who shows up early to a meetup, not expecting anything out of it. And he spoke recently at like the WooCommerce meetup. And someone was like, "Why is the easy digital downloads guy speaking at WooCommerce?" And it's like, if we help grow e-commerce for WordPress, that helps everyone. If we help grow WordPress, that helps everyone. So I think you can always think, oh, how does this look? Is this optically bad? And sometimes when things are optically bad, that's not good. But sometimes you really just have to give companies and people the benefit of the doubt and say, it's probably more work than it's really worth for them to do something nefarious here. And they're probably just trying to come up with a solution. So I try to, like, when people are jumping on a company, or, when something happens in our space that doesn't seem above board, more often than not, with the PipDig thing, it's a little bit different. That was a company doing something really nefarious and saying they weren't, and then digging their heels in really hard. Oh my goodness. And then continuing to dig, and I don't know, they'll be hitting the core at some point soon. But But more often than not, I think when a company makes a mistake, it really is an accident, and it really probably wasn't any like malicious intent.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be more okay with people making mistakes.
Yeah.
Because we learn from mistakes, and if we create this atmosphere in our community, in our space, that it doesn't feel like anyone can make a mistake. They can't say that one wrong thing or tweet that one wrong thing, or if we make people feel like they can't bring their best selves to the project, and they don't feel like they're respected, and not just respected, but like it's appreciated what they're bringing to the table, that's our biggest risk as a project. It's not Drupal coming in. It's not some other tool coming in and like eating our lunch. It's, do we lose this momentum we've built up? Do we lose this groundswell of goodwill and good code and legacy code, and figure out how to work towards a more exciting future? So
yeah, I agree with you that it's very important to continue to have a culture where it's okay for people to make mistakes, and I think Mika Epstein has written quite a bit about that. Ipstanu on WordPress
Yep.
Slack, and Mika and I have really bumped heads in the past, and me and Otto as well. And in fact, one of the incidents was the 404 to 301 plugin, where we saw some very bad activity on that plugin, and we exposed it on the blog, and we didn't know it at the time, but it actually eventually we figured out that it was this really bad actor in the UK, a guy called Mason Soiser, who we've written about extensively, who was going around buying plugins from developers and then basically putting malware in the plugin. But in the early stages, before we knew that, we started writing about some bad things happening in this plugin, and I think I butted heads with Mika via email, and her position was that one should give the developers the benefit of the doubt and not kind of throw them under the bus from the get-go, and assume the best until you know for sure that it's the worst, and so on. And we had our differences, and Mika and I certainly don't agree on everything these days, but I do agree with her point and your point that it needs to be okay to take some risks. It needs to be okay to make mistakes, and we mustn't sort of witch hunt people who are innovating or taking some risks and potentially making the odd mistake here and there. We need to help them, just get them back on track and move on, right?
I use sort of like one really simple rule in my interactions online, and that's, do I want to be the reason that someone's bummed out they came to work today? No. Is this that important? Probably not. And I think it's very easy, again, text is this very low emotional density. You don't get the context from tone, you don't get the context from body language, even from just timing and pausing that you get in a conversation. And I can't count the number of times now that there's someone who I've seen online who I've thought is very bristly, and met them in person and they're very warm, and very kind.
Yeah, and Mika is very cool in person. I've met her at WordCamp US, and she's great.
So that's something I would encourage anyone to do. If you feel like you're getting in that place of like the people I'm working with, or you're talking past each other, you're misfiring, try to get together in person. And I think it's part of the big value that WordCamps add, is that they add this very humanizing aspect to a global project. And we all do come from different points of view and different backgrounds and different cultures and languages, and I think it's very important to keep all of that in mind, and and that it's okay to disagree with someone, and that and that doesn't mean it's the end of your professional relationship either. That it's okay to have that disagreement and say, all right, let's agree that we disagree on this, and move on. Because otherwise we're just going to get stuck down in drama and things that aren't really, at the end of the day, what we want to spend our time focused on. Not to get political, but it's something that the Democratic Party is accused of very often in the United States, of attacking each other on an issue. Oh, you're not liberal enough on this, or you're not enough on that. And I think that there's aspects of that sort of tribalism in all sorts of communities. And if we spend all our time just saying, oh, you're not pure enough on this, or you don't give enough on that, it's not the right attitude to have. Everyone's doing the best they can, and whether they're volunteering or they're doing this as full-time work, it should be something they enjoy. It should be something that they want to show up and do, that they don't want to go somewhere else and do it. And that's going to be the secret to WordPress's success. It's not going to be some phase of the editor or some cool thing. And until some other community figures out what we've figured out so far, we're going to stay on top. It doesn't matter how good the software is if you don't have that groundswell of community and excitement and training on it. So,
And we come to WordCamps to heal,
I guess.
to build bridges.
Yeah. No,
To mend bridges.
to mend bridges, but I think also to extend some new ones. But I think there's going to be a guy here this weekend who is one of my favorite people in the WordPress community, Andy Fragan. And when I first met Andy, we were at a meetup, and I said, "Oh, like what do you do?" And he said he was an emergency room doctor. And so I made the mistake of assuming, "Oh, so are you here to like build medical sites?" And he said, "No, I build a GitHub updater." So I think a lot of people have duality to them. And just because someone, is a doctor doesn't mean they can't be a developer. And just because someone is a Reiki teacher doesn't mean they can't work at a bank. People have these different sides to them. And we shouldn't assume we know someone just because we look at someone and say, "Oh, you work in this, you must be like that." So
Agreed.
I think as we keep that diversity going in our space, it brings fresh new ideas in. So.
Agreed. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, Dave.
Yeah, it's
Thank
been
you
great.
so much for your time.
Yeah,
And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we're just right at the beginning of WordCamp Orange County, so I guess it starts tomorrow morning. And
Yeah, I'm excited for
wish
it.
you a very good WordCamp, and I'm sure I'll see plenty of you.
Yeah,
So,
you as well.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much to Dave Ryan for chatting with me at WordCamp Orange County. As I always mention, it's a very busy time at a WordCamp, and Dave found a couple hours to hang out with Kerry and myself and record that interview. I really enjoyed the conversation. You can find Dave on Twitter at Dave Ryan, except you replace the D at the beginning with a 0, and that's his Twitter handle. And we'll post links to his other profiles and so on in the show notes. Thanks very much, everyone, for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful week. Bye.